Hey everyone, your friendly neighborhood author here with some breadcrumbs of truth that the Lord has dropped into my spirit and into my real life on this week. So most of you know I recently spent 5 days in the hospital due to some Crohn's issues and complications. So last night I was super excited to get back on track with my new Journaling Connect group. So last night's journaling group was super powerful, and I personally came away with a good revelation about recognizing God in my real life. And I just wanted to go ahead and share that breadcrumb of truth with you today. So last night, our subject was Selah moments. And we talked a lot about the Psalms. We talked about how a lot of them were written by David, and how, in a way, the Psalms were his personal journal that's kind of published for us to read now. But they were personal, intimate moments that David and God had along their way and along their journey. He sang about lament, praise, just every emotion under the sun he wrote about, and he also sang them. So King David was a lover of music, a master of melody. A fun Bible fact is that King David once appointed 4,000 men to play instruments that he crafted with his own hands. So his psalms were used in worship ceremonies. So when I picture worship with 4,000 instruments, I picture worship, like loud worship with 4,000 instruments. Most scholars believe that the word Selah in the Psalms was an instruction to the musicians to stop and listen, or to pause and reflect. So this information kind of changed my perception of what a Selah moment was. So previously, I had always, when I thought of Selah, I always knew that it meant pause and reflect. So my picture that I had in my mind was of just kind of like what I'm doing right here, right now. Like I'm sitting on my little bench with my window seat, with my Bible, and I'm just, my little cup of coffee or my bubble bath or whatever. And I'm just pausing, I'm reflecting, I'm spending time with God. So that was my impression of a Selah moment. As a matter of fact, I think when I wrote my book, I think that's kind of what I described in that section about Selah moments. But last night, I began to get a little bit different of a picture. So if I'm picturing a worship service with 4,000 instruments, I'm picturing worship. And then you get the Selah, which is stop, pause, listen, invite God in. Just everything goes from, and I don't want to say chaos. I don't want to use that word because we're talking about worship. But in a minute, when I relate it to my life, you'll get why I kind of lean towards that word. But just in the loudness of the atmosphere of the worship, then you have this silence where you're inviting God into that space. So now, with that information and that picture of a Selah moment, I want to kind of anchor this down into real life and kind of what I got out of it. So I'm going to tell you a little story plucked right out of my life in this week. So when I originally went to the hospital, which ended up being a huge blessing. So when I went to the hospital on Sunday night, when I got into that Uber, I was just in a very, very empty place. But not only an empty place, a very chaotic place. So the medical condition that I was under, has largely been due to some ongoing pressures in my life, and some that were out of my control and some that I just mismanaged, but neither here nor there. The point of it is I was still pouring out. I still was serving. I still was doing all of the things that I was supposed to be doing. I'm still writing. I'm still doing all of the ministries, all of the things. But at the same time, I one of the things that I was struggling with was car trouble. So I was not going to the house of God. I was still watching online. I'm still worshiping in my house, but I'm not doing some of the things that I used to be able to do to get filled back up, and to pour back out. So on this day, I just want to give you a sense that I was just in a very empty place. And I felt when I stepped into that Uber, I had never, I don't think, felt more alone in my life. Some of that circumstantial and some of just where I was at, that I just had never felt more alone in my life. And not that I don't have a great support network, because I do, but just I was in a place in my life that I felt isolated. So when I was sitting in the back of the Uber, and I was on my way to the hospital, I found myself just crying, and I was crying in a place, and I found myself crying, and the one thing I kept asking God was, who fights for me? Who fights for me? Who's on my side? When my voice can't speak, who talks for me? Who fights for me? And that came from a place of emptiness, and a place of aloneness, a place of circumstances of just being 51 years old, unmarried, in the middle of a DNA search, trying to find my biological father. Children are grown. That particular day, I was home. I had been in bed for 9 days, pretty much by myself. And I won't say that people didn't check on me, but I felt that I just didn't have a voice in the world other than mine when I got into that Uber. And I only say that just to let you know the space that I was in on that day. So anyway, I drove to the hospital, and when I was riding in the hospital, the Uber driver, he spoke to me, and lesson learned: be careful what you tell your Uber driver, because I told him all about this very invasive procedure that I was about to have, or at least go and fight to be able to have. But anyway, he dropped me off at the hospital. I've spent 5 days there. Amazing revelations happened and other things, but later on, when I got home from the hospital, and a matter of fact, I want to say it was the day before the journaling group, I just was out walking my dog on a morning, like I do every single morning, at around 8 in the morning. And I was walking the dog, and a man spoke to me. He was going into a door that is in my very same apartment complex, about 2 doors down from me, not on the other side, just right there, about 2 doors down from me. And he waved at me, and I waved back, and he said, it's nice to see you up walking around. And I just kind of looked, and he I guess could see that I didn't recognize who he was. And so he said, I'm your Uber driver. I drove you to the hospital the other day. At that moment, I just my first thought was to think of all the embarrassing things that he must have thought about me. But last night, when we were in our journaling group, and we were talking in fellowship, and the Spirit was moving, and I came away with a revelation about recognizing God in the place in my life that I was. So when I sat in the back of that Uber on that day, on the way to the hospital, and my cry and my prayer out to God was, who talks for me? Who fights for me? Where is my person at? Where is my people at? And that might have even been just a prayer of selfishness, but the point is that I know that God was sitting there right with me. His Spirit was there speaking to me in the back of that Uber. But I was the one who was out of place. Like, I did not recognize it. And it took for me to see a person that I'm positive that I see almost every day of my life, that was sitting 2 feet away from me in an Uber, that I did not recognize at all. But I think that I was in a place to be able to recognize God. And so it took as uncomfortable as being in the hospital for 5 days was, and being poked and prodded, and a lot of good came from it, but it took that for me to have that Selah. So to me now, I took an Uber home from the hospital as well, and it was a very different experience. A different driver, but also a very different experience. My ride home, I rode home in complete peace, in complete assurance that everything was taken care of. I had so much clarity on even the exterior issues in my life. Also on my health, on just everything that was going on. So my ride home was very different than my ride there. And the thing that changed was me, my ability to recognize where God was and where I was. So on my ride there, I not only couldn't recognize that God was in the car with me, and he used a person that I see almost every day of my life to show me that if you cannot recognize this person 2 feet away from you, how do you expect to recognize me, who you can't see at all? Friends, he's there, and he does speak. He speaks to us. Sometimes we just have to Selah. And that has to be sometimes an intentional thing. That we just cut the noise. That we take authority over the noise. That we take Jesus' authority over the noise. He has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And sometimes we need to take that authority and stand on it. So I hope this breadcrumb of truth coming from my life into yours helped you out a little bit. If you're local to the Newport Richey, Florida area and you want to join us for journaling and prayer, the information will be at the end of the video. Also, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel and look for me on Facebook and Instagram. My name is Anna M. Burks, and I'm your friendly neighborhood author.